The Conceptual Image, Chapter 21. This chapter covers the emergence of conceptual illustration, which became a significant design approach in Poland, the United States, Germany, and Cuba during the second half of the 20th century. The conceptual image dealt with the design of the entire space, including integration of word and image, and conveyed not merely narrative information, but ideas and concepts. During the exploding information culture of the second half of the 20th century, the graphic artist had the entire history of visual arts from which to draw inspiration. The decades after World War II saw the development of the conceptual image in graphic design. Now, our book begins in the 50s and goes up to the early 80s, but this style is still quite popular today. As photography and video took over the role of documentation, graphic illustration became more expressive, more symbolic. During this period, graphic artists created more personal images and pioneered individual styles and techniques, really just blurring the boundaries between fine arts and public visual communication. The style characteristics for the conceptual image are narrative information communicated with ideas and concepts, the familiar in an unfamiliar setting, scale changes, substitution, visual puns, and play. An Italian graphic designer, Armando Testa, was an abstract painter until 1946, when he started a graphic design studio in Turin. This ad campaign had an international impact on graphic design thinking. What he did was that he borrowed from the vocabulary of surrealism and combined the image of a tiger with the strength of the bull elephant. In other words, he put the familiar in an unfamiliar setting and juxtaposed two unrelated objects to send a conceptual message. The poster was an important form of communication in Poland and really a source of national pride that received international attention during the 1950s. Tadeusz Trepkowski was the first poster artist from Poland to emerge after World War II. His famous 1953 anti-war poster demonstrates his approach of distilling content to the simplest statement. A few simple shapes symbolize a devastated city superimposed on a silhouette of a falling bomb. After Trepkowski's early death, Henryk Tomaszewski, a professor at the Warsaw Academy of Fine Arts, became the spiritual head of Polish graphic design. His posters were composed of bits of torn and cut paper, then printed by the silkscreen process. Typical of this casual collage approach is this film poster. The light-hearted approach was followed by a tendency toward the metaphysical and surrealism, as evidenced in his work. Here we see Cislowicz's poster that is closely associated with the Polish avant-garde theater. He took the poster, a public art form, and transformed it into a metaphysical medium to express profound ideas that would be difficult to articulate verbally. His techniques included enlarging collage, montage, and halftone images to a scale that turns the dots into a texture, and then setting up an interplay between the two levels of information, the image and the dots that create it. Here, collage elements are superimposed on the word cirque and a clown on a high-contrast photograph of an elephant. Others who evolved the Polish poster and arrived at unique personal visions include Jan Lenica, who pushed the collage style toward a more menacing and surreal communication, and also worked on experimental animated films. As a result of government censorship during the social unrest of the 1980s, Polish posters frequently addressed universal concerns and international issues. For example, there's a famous poster by Marian Nowinski, and it shows the image of a book bearing the name of the Chilean poet Pablo Neruda, and it's held shut by large metal spikes. That poster lamented censorship and the suppression of ideas everywhere, not just Neruda's work. Here's another example by Lenica for the Warsaw Biennale. Meandering arabesques metamorphosize into a winged being. Jerzy Fleisak created this cinema poster with bright colors and informal shapes to convey the delightful resonance of the typical 50s Polish poster. He worked in a simplified, colorful collage style. Starowiejsk, one of the first graphic designers to incorporate the metaphysical and surrealism into Polish posters, represented a darker, more somber side of the national character. This may have represented either a reaction to the social constraints of the dictatorial regime or despair and yearning for the autonomy that has so often been denied the Polish nation during its long history. Here the cube is drawn in perspective, transforming the flat page into deep space, forcing the strange, complex object above it to float. Here we see Jerzy Janowicz's Solidarity logo. This logo was wildly popular in the 80s, and when I was in art school, many people had t-shirts with this logotype on it. Here, crude letter forms evoke street graffiti, and the crowded letter forms are a metaphor for the people marching in the streets of Poland, which I represent here on the right. American graphic designer Milton Glaser, his designs include the I Love New York logo, the psychedelic Bob Dylan poster, and logos for DC Comics and the Brooklyn Brewery logo. In '54, he co-founded Pushpin Studios, co-founded New York Magazine, and established Milton Glaser Inc. in 1974. His artwork has been featured in exhibits and placed in the permanent collections of museums worldwide. Throughout his long career, he designed many posters, publications, and architectural designs, and received many awards for his work, including the National Medal of the Arts Award from President Barack Obama in 2009. He was the very first graphic designer to ever receive this award. He founded Pushpin Studios, whose versatility and variety of work made his singular genius absolutely hard to categorize. During the 60s, he created images using flat shapes formed by thin black ink contour lines, adding color by applying adhesive color films. He recently passed away, and the outpouring over Milton Glaser from the design community was absolutely unparalleled. Here's that famous Bob Dylan poster from 1967. Transcending subject and function, this image became a symbolic crystallization of its time. This popular folk rock singer, Bob Dylan, is presented as a black silhouette with brightly colored hair patterns inspired by Art Nouveau sources. Glaser's concert posters and record album designs manifest a singular ability to combine his personal vision with the essence of the content. Here's a very conceptual poster about a Dada and Surrealism exhibition. The smaller table is isolating the word real within the longer word surrealism. Many Dadaists became surrealists, and the way the type is pushing through the table suggests that. Another conceptual piece for Poppy Records. On the top it says, "From Poppy with Love," and a poppy is blooming from a granite cube that's symbolizing a new independent company breaking through the monolithic conventions of the recording industry. Here's a Bach Variations poster where we see a variety of drawing approaches signifying the diversity of Bach's musical talents. Here's Milton's Art Is poster from 1996. Visual and verbal meanings are explored by manifesting a hat as a photograph, a shadow, a word, a pictograph, and a written definition. His partner in crime at Pushpin Studios was Seymour Quast. His vision is really personal, yet communicates on a universal level. He frequently used the technique of line drawings overlaid with adhesive color films and experimented with a large variety of media and substrata. In his work, we see echoes of children's art, primitive art, folk art, expressionist woodcuts, and even comic books. All of these appear in his imaginative reinventions of the world. Quast's color is frontal and intense. Here we see a conceptual poster about the bombing of Hanoi and a mundane popular ad slogan at the time. In Bad Breath was a popular commercial for Scope mouthwash. And here he shows Uncle Sam with bad breath given the bombing of Hanoi. It's an anti-war poster. Here, Quast artfully plays with scale by putting the familiar in an unfamiliar setting. A shoe and a cigar and a pair of dentures become part of the landscape. Seymour shows his knowledge of Victorian, Art Nouveau, optic art, and Art Deco letter forms in a playful way. He created many wonderful display typeface designs. Now, Pushpin Studios spawned a number of young graphic designers and illustrators who worked there for various periods of time. This included Barry Zaid, who became a force in revivalism and historicism, especially Art Deco, that was prevalent in design during this period, and James McMullen, who restored watercolor as a means of graphic expression and made fluid lettering an important part of his images. Paul Davies, who drew inspiration from primitive colonial American art and approached integration of word and image in a painterly manner. McMullen achieved prominence during the 1960s with energetic ink line and watercolor illustrations that were often combined with multiple images, and significant changes in spatial depth, image size, and scale, as well as fluid lettering, made them stand out. Look at this terrific example of the conceptual image by Lou Danziger. It's for American paintings from the Met Museum. And again, we see a very clever but simple solution where the American flag is transposed on the brush bristles. Paul Rand appears again with the conceptual piece from 1949, right on the brink of the movement. And here he's making modern art as accessible as a meal. Notice that the plate becomes the palette, and the spoon is like a paintbrush. Woody Pirtle is one of the many major Texas designers who worked for Stan Richards during their formative years, and his work really epitomizes the originality of Texas graphics. Here we see his logo for Mr. and Mrs. Aubrey Hare. It's got an unexpected wit. Do you see the word hair there in the middle of the logo? That's a conceptual logo. And here on the right, we see a very clever image he crafted for Amnesty International about the subject of gun trafficking. Notice how all the arrows make up the shape of the gun. Here's Pirtle's hot seat poster for Knoll Furniture. He ironically combines the clean Helvetica type and generous white space of modernism with regional iconography. On the right, we see a piece that he did, Stop the Plant, and in the smoke, we see Again, the familiar in an unfamiliar setting, the skull appearing. The poster craze in the U.S. during the 60s was a grassroots affair, fostered by the social upheavals of the decade. This included the civil rights movement, public protests against the Vietnam War, the beginnings of the women's liberation movement, and a search for alternative lifestyles. The posters from the late 60s hippie subculture, centered in the Haight-Ashbury section of San Francisco, were referred to as psychedelic posters because they were related to anti-establishment values, to rock music and psychedelic drugs. Robert Wesley Wes Wilson was the major innovator of that psychedelic style. Other prominent members of this movement were the designers at Kelly Mouse Studios and Victor Moscoso, the only major designer with formal training. Design influences included the flowing, sinuous curves of Art Nouveau, particularly the letter forms of Alfred Roller, intense optical color vibration of op art, and the recycling of images from popular culture or manipulation of images, such as reducing continuous tone images to high contrast black and white, which were prevalent in pop art. In this hand-designed type, you see the relationship to the typography of the Vienna Secession as well. The primary clients of artists in this movement were promoters of rock and roll concerts and dances. The experience at these events, which included loud music and light shows, manifested itself graphically in swirling forms and warped and bent lettering that bordered on illegibility, such as Wilson's Grateful Dead poster. It was reported that the younger generation that attended these events deciphered rather than read the messages on the poster. Peter Max did this love poster in 1970. This is one of his most famous images, and here he combines the fluid organic line of Art Nouveau with the bold, hard contour of the comic book and pop art. In his finest work, Max experimented with images and printing techniques. His posters and merchandise, from mugs and t-shirts to clocks, offered a more palatable version of psychedelic art and found a mass audience among young people all across America. In the late 20th century, David Lance Goines continued to develop his poster style while he printed and published books at St. Hieronymus Press, formerly the Berkeley Free Press, which he had bought in 1971. He combined offset lithography and graphic design as a medium for personal expression and public communications. His work proves that even in the late 20th century era of over-specialization, it's possible for individual artists and craftsmen to define a personal direction and operate as independent creative forces with total control of the work. He studied and wrote a book on calligraphy. He owned the press in Berkeley, where he designed, illustrated, and hand-lettered posters. He made the negatives and the plates. He operated the press to print the edition. Symmetrical composition, simplified line drawing, quiet planes of flat color, and subtle stripes rimming the contours of his forms are characteristic of his poster designs. Now we move to Germany and the very striking work of Gunter Rambo. Here we see his poster for Othello in 1978. The pathos of the play is expressed by an image within an image. We see a tattered poster hanging on a wire fence in front of a really bleak apartment complex. This is a terrific conceptual image. It's called South African Roulette. It's about apartheid, and we see a bandaged hand and the blood stain, which is in the shape of Africa, conveying the pathos of suffering and revolution going on at the time. In emerging countries of Latin America, Asia, and Africa, the poster became a major vehicle for challenging authority and expressing dissent. The artists and advocates who created these posters tackled political and social issues with the intent of motivating people to take one side of a political or social struggle. Leading Cuban graphic designers include Raul Martinez, who creates illustrative designs such as his 1970 poster honoring the Cuban people, and Felix Beltran, who is art director for the Commission for Revolutionary Action, designed posters to promote commemorative days and past leaders in an effort to maintain public consciousness of the Cuban Revolution. Important inspirations for Cuban graphic designers have included pop art and the psychedelic poster. The icon, ideograph, and telegraphic message are more effective in developing countries, such as the symbol of Che Guevara, which has come to represent struggle against oppression throughout the Third World. Here's another look at some additional Cuban posters. And I visited Cuba about 19 years ago, and it's amazing because you can see these large billboards being hand-painted in this style, and the level of art and craftsmanship is quite high. Here we have an unidentified artist creating a poster for the Cuban Revolution. The clouds are parting to reveal an orange sun, symbolizing the ill-fated 26th of July 1953 assault on the Santiago Army Barracks, which launched the Cuban Revolution. Here's Elena Serrano's Day of the Heroic Guerrilla poster. It's an iconic image of Che Guevara that's transforming into a map of South America in a radiating image signifying revolutionary victory. Let's take a look to finish this chapter with the popularity of this style today. On the left, we see the original Milton Glaser Dillon poster, and on the right, a storefront in Florence that's picking up on some of the design vernacular used in the poster. Conceptual advertising is a mix of creativity and artistic ideas to form mind-blowing ads that really get noticed. On the left, of course, we see Armando Testa's poster for Pirelli tires. On the right, we see a contemporary conceptual ad produced by the World Wildlife Fund. It's fusing the idea of the rainforest to the lungs of our planet.